Hi, this is Eddie Deason. You're listening to Breaking the Fourth Wall. I was Mandark in Dexter's Laboratory. Ha 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 ha.
You are listening to Breaking the Fourth Wall on Realm of the Mist Entertainment.
Okie.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of Breaking the Fourth Wall. I am Christopher Stolle, your host, and today I'm sitting down with author Neil Gordon. Neil, how you doing today, Neil?
I am well, thank you. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Just waiting for this little punishment to be over, I guess you could say.
I know. We're all waiting.
Excited to go back to work. Please don't ever air this episode to my boss. Today, obviously, Neil, I want to get to know you as an author and what inspires you to be an author. But of course, we got to dig into what even. Well, yeah, we'll start there. What even made you decide that, hey, this is the career for me. This is what I want to do.
Well, when I wrote my first book, when I wrote the book, I didn't know if I was worthy to call myself a writer. And then, so that was a process that I had to go through writing the book. And then when I found an editor who would help me with it, and I gave it to her to read for the first time, I was on pins and needles waiting for that phone call that I knew was coming. And she would tell me, yay or nay. Yay, keep going, or nay, stick with the day job. So she loved it. That was A Cobbler's Tale back in 2018. So that was the moment where, I knew I could do this, and I could call myself a writer, or an author, or a novelist, or any of those three. I like novelist the best because I write novels. Right. So that seems to fit my description of how I write, or the type of writing that I do. I write mostly historical fiction. 3 of the 4 books that are published are historical fiction. One, the righteous one, that's metaphysical fiction. And I have 2 books about to come out. One book's coming out next month in June. That's historical fiction. And another one will be out probably sometime in the fall. Is historical fiction as well. And I'm actually starting on another manuscript, which is a sequel to the one coming out in June, which is an extension of that. So, I got a lot in the pipeline. I got a good collection already up that's been published.
Well, first and foremost, I definitely got to dig in when you say the phrase historical fiction, and right. You also used metaphysical fiction, which I'll put a pin in that and come back to that one in a minute. Okay. But since it seems like the main genre you like to write in is historical fiction, maybe for the layman people listening that may not know exactly what historical fiction is, I'm assuming I may be one of those layman people. Historical fiction is you take actual historical events and put a fictitious story into it. Would that be a correct assumption?
That's pretty good. Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah, I take a time period that has some interesting events that you want to spin your story around. For example, the Bomb Squad. It takes place in the year 1916, right before America gets involved in World War I. When the story begins, America is neutral in the war. And we have German spies here in the New York metropolitan. I'm in New York, so I say here. The New York metropolitan area, we have spies blowing things up, trying to distract America from getting into the war. So my story revolves around that time period, around those events. So I have historical events that I use as backdrop, as color for my story, as motivation for my characters in my story. Then I create fictional characters that live within at that time period. So it's a fictional tale of 2 German Americans, 2 men, both born in Germany, both moved to the United States. One is a German spy, still loyal to the fatherland, and the other one is an American patriot and a New York City police detective. And they're of course they're going to be fighting each other in terms of trying to prevent one from the spy from continuing causing their havoc in New York. So yeah, that's a little bit of a idea of what historical fiction is about.
What got you into doing that type of writing, where you would take? I would assume there's a lot of research involved, and I kind of want to write in the 17th century, so I have to figure out what's going on in the 17th century, and then what would make a good story out of these events. And I imagine there's a lot of research into it. What made you want to? What really inspired you to want to take on that style of writing?
Well, that's what I like to read, so I like reading historical fiction. I like when I read good historical fiction, I could learn something about the time, and it's easier way of digesting it in a more entertaining way than a very dry history book, nonfiction book would be. So I love when stories are woven into history. You can learn about World War I, you can learn about World War II, you can learn about Native American life in the 17th century, like you just said, in my book Moonflower, which is exactly when that takes place. So, right before the English took over New York, it was called New Amsterdam, and the Dutch controlled it, and that's when my story begins in 1670. And it's a journey of a teenage boy living his life, trying to make a connection with the Great Spirit. He meets up with an English officer who is a very evil character. He goes to this whole rites of passage with his indigenous tribes at the time, and so this is epic tale that would follow of his in the 17th century.
Okay. All right, but it sounds interesting. It really does, and I, surprisingly enough, I haven't read a whole lot of historical fiction. Like when I think of, I've never thought of like them together. I've always either had, historical books where I'm reading actual things like the biography of Patton, for example, or I read something that's completely, fictitious, like, for the sake of argument, Wolfenstein, if they ever came out with a novel for the video game or whatever.
Right.
And I use that one as an example because I know that's a fictitious World War II story, but it's completely science fiction and made up. So it's really interesting to me to hear that there is a genre out there, and again, maybe I'm just not versed enough in it, that there is a genre out there for taking actual historic, and I find that fascinating that you can actually keep the actual historical event happening the way it happened, so you learn something, but you don't it's almost like you're not realizing you're learning something as you're following the story of the fictional characters.
Yeah, that's exactly how it is. So it's a nice way of learning something. Because you're going to spend hours and hours of reading a book. It might be good to learn something at the same time. So it's a good way for young people to learn history through historical fiction. And there's a lot of great stories. It's a gigantic genre. Lots of books are written in that genre, and even subgenres of it. Historical romantic fiction and historical thrillers and historical crime, and there's you could whittle it down to even a finer point by going into other directions as well. So yeah, it's something I like to do, and I like it because when I'm writing and I'm doing my research at the same time, I'll look for big events that are interesting. Like the bomb squad, it starts off with the explosion at Black Tom Island. So on June 30th, 1916 at midnight, the German spies blew up an armaments depot called Black Tom Island, which was right behind the Statue of Liberty in New York Harbor. And it was a gigantic explosion. This was like it just really damaged the Statue of Liberty itself. It's hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of damage. Blew out windows in Manhattan. Blew out windows in New Jersey. It was quite something. So that's how the book begins, around that event. And of course, my detective, Max Rothman, is the one who has to investigate the bombing. And that's how the bomb squad starts off.
See, now you're making me want to read it. Well, I put a pin in the question earlier. I'm going to bring it back because I know we're sitting on the historical fiction.
Right.
I am curious what metaphysical fiction is and what the difference obviously is between the two, besides the fact that historical obviously is historical fact event. And even more so, what made you step over into that genre when you, like you said, your niche was historical?
Well, my first book, A Cobbler's Tale, is historical fiction, but I have a taste of metaphysical fiction in the book, where one of my characters is a young boy in that, and he's what's called a tzaddik. According to Kabbalic mysticism, Jewish mysticism, called the Kabbalah, there are only 36 tzaddik on the earth at any one time. And to be considered a tzaddik is that you are the hand of God on earth. So you're not like you have a superpower, but you have this empathy that you could reach out to people, and they could relate to you in a way that, if he touches you as you're about to pass, he can make that connection from the passing person to God, to Hashem. So he has this ability, and I talk about it in The Cobbler's Tale. But in The Righteous One, now this same character is 60 years old, and he's called upon by some people in New York City because they know he exists, this tzaddik exists, and only that the tzaddik can fight his evil counterpart, which is called the Rasha. So he's a cobbler. He's a reluctant tzaddik because he knows he has this gift, but he hasn't used it in all these years. But he's called upon to resurrect his gift, to re-energize his gift and fight this evil character. And this evil character has some power, so he could foresee the future in his dreams. And so he's learned how to live in his dreams, how to be awake in his dreams, how to be lucid in his dreams, and he's able to predict the future. And he's made himself very wealthy, very powerful. But of course, he doesn't use it for good. He uses it for his own wealth and evil. And his son is involved with these schemes. So they try to stop him. So they call upon Moshe, the cobbler, this humble little cobbler, to fight this evil man. And the battle itself it has to take place in the dream world. So Moshe has to learn how to be lucid in his dreams, so he can fight this evil character in the dream world. So it's the idea there that I'm touching on the consciousness, okay, that the consciousness is separate. We live within our consciousness in our body, but does the consciousness live on after our body dies? So it's that type of questions I bring up. So yes, this is metaphysical. It's spiritual in a way. It's not concrete in any belief that this is real, right? Though we want to think it's real. So that's sort of how I describe the genre and how The Righteous One fits into this metaphysical fiction.
Just so I'm clear, and for everything, obviously, with a lot of your characters, I'm sensing the theme of Jewish heritage. Obviously, you come from Jewish descent as well, but with the metaphysical, I'm curious. Would you ever step outside the what's the terms I'm looking for here? The traditions of the Jewish faith for some of your metaphysical tales, like maybe Native American belief systems or Christianity's, like a kind of like a Da Vinci Code in a sense type deal, or even Muslim faiths and their otherworldly beliefs, I guess you could say. I don't mean that disrespectfully for anybody. I don't mean it as like I don't believe they exist. I'm saying the beliefs where you have things like turning water into wine, for example. That's what I mean by otherworldly.
Yeah, well, I did in Moonflower. I talk about indigenous spirituality and their so-called religious beliefs. Though they don't have I wouldn't say how they live as a religion. It's a traditional. It's a lifestyle. It's a connection to the earth, a respect of the earth. So I talk about that in Moonflower quite a bit.
Right. And
a new book coming out of Hope City. It's about a Jewish boy, but he ends up posing as a Catholic boy in this mining town in Hope, Alaska, and so he learns a lot about Catholicism. But he's posing himself. He's not a real Catholic. He's a Jewish kid, but he's posing as a Catholic. And the theme of the 7 deadly sins is woven through this story. So I do touch on that in Hope City. Who knows what comes up next? I'm Jewish because that's a lot of the theme of my books, and I understand that the best growing up culturally that way. But I do like dabbling into other areas to understand other types of religions and traditions as well. It helps me learn more about it by my research and studying and asking questions. So yeah, it's always good to try to expand, what I'm writing about, push the envelope, go further than what's comfortable. Because as an artist, that's one of the goals that you're trying to achieve.
Right. And again, that's something I find fascinating because just like with your historical fiction, it almost seems like dabbling within these belief systems in the metaphysical realm with the fiction that you're writing. It again could help people more maybe understand a faith or belief system that they're not accustomed to. Maybe make it an easier pill to swallow. Yeah.
Well, the idea of fiction is to escape reality. I mean, we have, that's why people read, because we want to escape reality. We want to explore other worlds. We want to get in the minds of, the writer, of course, but you want to get lost in the book. So, that's what you try to achieve. That's what I want in a book. And as I write my books, that's what I'm hoping that the reader will get from it. But they get lost in it, and they can't, they're also can't wait to read the next chapter and the next chapter, and are disappointed when they get to the finish. So that's, there's a lot there, because unlike other forms of art, like you go to a museum, you might spend an hour or 2 or 3 hours at a museum, or a concert, you might spend a couple hours to invest in a time as a patron of the arts. But when you're in a book, you're investing a lot more time than that, weeks and sometimes months for some people. So you're asking a lot for a reader to take on your book. And so, it's quite an honor when someone reads your book and actually writes a nice review for you, which is also wonderful, or actually even contacts you and wants to talk about it, which I always love to do. So that's a really the best part. I think the biggest reward about writing is getting that feedback that people have enjoyed what you've written.
Well, that's kind of a perfect segue. You do have a gift for everybody listening right now, which will be in the description down below. And why don't you go ahead and let them know what you have planned for them?
Yeah, well, as I said, first of all, let me back up. I became a book writer. Once you become a book writer, you also have to become a bookseller. And when you become a bookseller, one of the most important things to sell books is have good reviews. So, people before they, if you go on Amazon, this is how I buy books. I'll go down, I'll skim down and read the reviews. If the reviews are 4 and 5 stars, that's usually my, the level of book I want to read. Anything with, 4 stars or more.
Right.
So yeah, that's what I'm looking for. So I need reviews. So what I would like to offer to your listening audience is a free download of my new book, The Bomb Squad. Just have to send me an email to neilperrygordon@gmail.com, and I'll send you a PDF of the book. And all I ask in return is, read it. Hopefully you'll like it, and leave me a review on Amazon. That's the deal I'm making. So you got a free book. Hopefully you'll read it, and hopefully you'll like it, and give me 4 or 5 stars.
And I'm going to be downloading it myself because now I want to read it. I do. I really am interested in this. And guys, that link will be in the description down below. So from this video, once you're done listening to us, or this audio, once you're done listening to us, please click that link, get your free book of The Bomb Squad, read it, and jump over to Amazon and help Mr. Gordon out with the reviews. The more reviews he gets, the better his books can do, the more books he'll put out for everybody. So, I mean, it's a win-win for everybody. It really is.
I think so.
So, getting back into the topics of what inspired it, like, one of the things I'm sitting on here is that you started writing or got your first book published in 2018, you said, correct? Only 2 years ago?
Yes. Correct.
And you've already put out 5 books with 3 more on the way, if my count is correct.
I have 4 published books, and I have 1 coming out in June, and then I'll have probably 2 more by the end of the year, God willing, that everything goes well. But yeah, so I'll have a total of 7 by the end of 2020.
How do you find the time? And I asked this from a first person perspective. I've attempted to write a book and failed miserably because I couldn't stay with it, and it's a rare trait. So I always respect authors to begin with, but it almost seems to me like you're writing multiple books at one time. How do you not?
No, I don't. I don't write. Well, the only time I do overlap. So if I finished a manuscript, now I have to wait for my editor because she has a schedule. So until she's free, I have one sitting waiting for her to edit. So I start a new one. So they overlap, but it's not like I'm working on two at the same time. But how do I do it? I just push. I push through it. Like people say, do you have writer's block? And so writer's block to me is a barrier. You get to a wall and you're like, oh my God, I'm stuck here. I can't get through. I'm just going to give up. This is not worth it. Not worth the effort. I push through. I push myself through. I don't give up. I break through those barriers, and I love the process of writing. So that's why I like doing it. I like the storytelling aspect of it. I like pushing out the words first, and then coming back and reworking the words, like a sculptor will rework clay in a way. So I like that process. I like the mechanics of storytelling. I like working with my editor and getting her feedback, and I like the process of getting the book proofread and then getting a book cover design done, and then there's nothing better than getting the actual physical book in your hand when it finally is out. Then getting it up on Amazon and then hearing back reviews from people who read it, or friends who tell me that they loved it. So there's a lot of gratification from it. So that's why I keep pushing, because I like that. I like that feedback. I like that gratification. It just, it does well on my soul.
Now, is this going back to what inspired you to even become a novelist, a writer? Again, two years ago is when you got your first book published. How long were you attempting to be an author before the first book finally released?
Well, I started it and wrote it, and that's the way I did it. I mean, I wasn't struggling trying to write. I knew I wanted to write. I took an online writing course with a friend. We decided to do it together. A friend of mine lives in Atlanta. So we did that for a couple of months. That was in 2017. And then when I was done with that, I'm going, okay, I'm writing my book. So I had a story in mind about my great-grandparents who immigrated from southern Poland in 1910. And I used that as the basis of my story. Of course, I made them much more heroic than they really were, and much more adventurous, and probably much more interesting. But I used them as my characters. So I had characters in mind. Not that I ever met them. They passed before I was born. But I had some family members who did meet them. So I was able to have conversations with them about what was it like and what do you remember about them. So that helped. So that all just worked out nicely, and I got it's almost 60 reviews I have on that book on Amazon, all 4- and 5-star reviews. So I got a lot of good press on it. So for a first book out of the gate, it was very successful.
That's awesome, especially because of the fact that I especially find this interesting is that you used your grandparents as inspiration for your first book. Or your great-grandparents, excuse me. That's awesome in its own right. I mean, you say you made them more heroic than they probably, or interesting than they probably were in real life. But I hate to be the one to correct the author here, but it seems like they were interesting enough to inspire you.
They inspired me for sure. Well, I don't want to give away the book and give any spoilers.
Oh no.
But what my great grandfather, he had two choices. So he took one choice in his life, which was not heroic, and I made him take another choice in his life, which was heroic. So which was definitely helped the book along. So so I made him a hero of the story. When in real life he wasn't so heroic, but we need drama in our stories, and so that's what I gave him. I gave him this heroic moment in his life.
Well, obviously with the 3 books that you have coming, the one coming this coming month in June, and then the subsequent ones that'll come out before the end of 2020. What's next? I guess kind of the question is now we're going to go into the what if categories. Like, is this maybe without spoilers that you may want to revisit some of your previous characters, or maybe you want to step into maybe a different genre? And if so, what style of genre do you think you would like to attempt or tackle next?
Well, the Bomb Squad will have a sequel. I haven't started that yet. And Hope City, which is the book coming out in June, will have a sequel, which I did start. So those 2 books are coming. I have another book coming out in between those books in the fall, which is historical fiction. So I got 3 books yet to come. Beyond that, I don't know. That's a little far out for me to even contemplate, because who knows? I mean, maybe it has something to do with the, I was thinking a good story could be about the 1918 pandemic, writing about that and using what I know what happened now, because, now what's nice, well, it's not nice, but what's interesting as a writer is that you could just watch and learn people's behavior, what's going on in the world today, and you can imagine things being similar to what happened 100 years ago when we had the Spanish flu.
Right.
So using what I'm learning now to write about people back then could be interesting. So that's something I've been tossing around.
I would imagine it, not to step away from the author, but I would imagine taking what you know today and placing it back 100 years ago, I would almost think it would be an even worse hardship on people because they didn't have a lot of the amenities that we have today.
That's true. And no antibiotics, and medicine was not like in medicines today, but, we all had the same fears. I mean, you look at the pictures, you see people walking around with masks, and you see some of the comments and articles. People have to, quarantining and businesses shutting down, and some cities open sooner than others. So there are a lot of remarkable similarities. Of course, things were not as, we have many more comforts today than we did 100 years ago.
Right.
But people are people, and we still complain about the same things and have a lot of the same problems. So, I think I could learn. You go to the grocery store now, and you could just see fear in people's eyes, because that's really all you see now, with just their eyes. Mm-hmm. So, you really focus on that. So that, it's become an interesting idea that, who knows, maybe it'll percolate into a book.
Definitely would be one that I think a lot of people maybe find some personal connection to, which I imagine as an author is something that you really get, and I imagine through like your reviews and your one-on-ones talking to people about your books and all that. Definitely got to ask, how rewarding is it when somebody comes up to you and says, I've read the Immigrant's Tale book, your great grandparents' book, for example, and it's like, man, I totally get that. Like it spoke to me personally because my family did this, or something, where there's an actual personal connection to it.
I've had comments exactly like that, what you just described for A Cobbler's Tale. People came to me and said, I'm an immigrant. I totally related to the story. I love the book. Yeah, it's wonderful. There's, it's so such a great feeling just from my own ego that it's just like, I'd love to talk about it. I went down to Florida last year, and I sat with some of my mother's friends who read the book. And they go, can we talk to you about the book? I'm like, yeah, that's my favorite topic. Let's talk about it. So it's a wonderful thing, because I love to hear feedback from people. That's, you want to do a podcast about me and my book? Yeah, I'm happy to do it anytime. I'd love to talk about it.
That's awesome. I would love to talk about it, but first I want to read them, and second off, I don't want to give away spoilers. So if you and I ever sat down to talk about your books after I've read them, it would be off air. I want other people to read the books too. But the big thing, I feel like I'm gonna be giving the cat out of the bag here, so I apologize in advance. But again, going back to the 2018 release of your first book, Cobblestone. you, sir, I know are not like, in your 20s, for example. So I have a purpose for this. You obviously are a little later in your years and all. What do you, how do I want to phrase this? What words of advice would you like to give an aspiring author, whether they're 18, fresh out of high school with dreams and ideas, or maybe somebody in their 50s and 60s saying, has always been sitting with a story in their mind, is like, but I'm too old for this. What advice would you give them?
Well, you're never too old, because Benjamin Franklin was productive in his life till he died. Look at great artists, Picasso. I mean, they're always productive and that's inspiring to me. I have a 25-year-old son who I'm helping write his book. He's writing a nonfiction book, what anyone comes across when writing is this the challenge of it, is this the difficulty. It's not an easy thing to do, and my advice is just don't give up. Just keep pushing through it. When you hit that wall, you have to have that discipline of going, I'm not going to give up. I'm going to keep doing this. I'm not going to stop. So you got to establish a process, a way you write every day, and stick to that discipline. I wake up 4 o'clock every morning to write. I've done that now for a couple of years. So I have a discipline that I stick to, and whenever I can grab time in between everything else, that's what I like about writing, is that I can do it on my laptop. I mean, years ago, 20, 30 years ago, you needed a typewriter, and then if you wanted to do research, like for historical fiction, you have to go to the library. It would have taken me, 3 years to write A Cobbler's Tale or any of my books. Now I can just Google. And I find everything I need at my fingertips, and I can write without using liquid paper to fix my mistakes. And so the tools of the trade of the writer makes it much easier today to write. And it's a passion, and once you have that passion, you don't let anything stop you from that. So you have to also have the type of obsessive compulsive personality that I have, that once I get stuck on something, that's it. I'm like zoomed in on it. I'm very focused.
I can't stop until this is right. Yeah, I get that. Awesome, Neil. I have had an absolute blast. Again, guys, go send an email to neilperrygordon@gmail.com. I said that correct? Yes. neilperrygordon@gmail.com. Yes, you have. All right, and it will be in the description down below to get your free PDF copy of The Bomb Squad. Make sure you go over to Amazon after you read it. Give a 4 or 5 star review, or an honest review. I shouldn't push for the 4 or 5s. I think it'll get the 4 and 5s. But
yeah, I'm always pimping for reviews. So yeah, I'm like, don't be stingy on the stars.
Don't be stingy on the stars, but give an honest review. And,
honest review is always welcome.
And of course, guys, I'm definitely going to do this now. I'm going to invite Neil back on once he releases his new book in June, so that way we can start talking about it.
Oh, thank you.
Guys, thank you very much. Neil, the last question I got to ask, besides the neilperrygordon@gmail.com, if anybody wishes to contact you to discuss your books or get into further detail than we covered here in the interview today, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Well, through email is fine, or go to my website, which is neilperrygordon.com. So go to my website or email me, neilperrygordon@gmail.com. Either way, or I have a Facebook page. We can always instant message on Facebook. So Neil Perry Gordon, my Facebook page, too. It's another way of reaching out to me.
All right, great. And of course, guys, thank you for joining us here at Breaking the Fourth Wall. If you enjoyed this video or episode in any capacity, hit that thumbs up button, like, share, comment, subscribe. Check out all the other great podcasts around Novelist Entertainment. And here on YouTube, go ahead and jump over to our sister channel, Sounds Dicey Gaming, for all your video game and tabletop role-play content needs. And of course, if you prefer your podcast in audio-only format, we've got you covered. Just check out Realm of the Mist Entertainment on Anchor.fm, Apple iTunes, Spotify, Pandora, or wherever quality podcasts can be heard. Neil, again, this has been an absolute pleasure. I absolutely enjoyed this. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And guys, I will catch you on the next Breaking the Fourth Wall. Have a good night.